Archivist Kethvorl had spent 300 years studying the species called humans. And in all that time he had reached one firm conclusion. They were soft. He stood now at the observation deck of Concordance Prime, the great neutral station where dozens of species gathered to trade and negotiate and occasionally threaten each other with war. And he watched a group of human diplomats share their lunch with a cluster of refugee children from the Veth colonies. The children were not human, not even close, with their gray skin and too many eyes and bodies that moved in ways that made most species uncomfortable. But the humans did not seem to notice or care. One human woman was teaching a small Veth child how to fold paper into the shape of a bird. And when the child finally succeeded, the woman's face split into a smile so genuine that Kethvorl could feel the warmth of it from across the room. This was humanity in its truest form, he thought, and he made a note in his mental archive: caretaker species. He had classified them: gentle and cooperative and ultimately inconsequential in the grand power dynamics of the galaxy. The Silurian Collective had been cataloging younger species for over 40,000 years. And Kethvorl was one of their finest archivists, a being of pure logic and careful observation, who had witnessed the rise and fall of empires without ever feeling his heart's quicken. Humans quickened nothing in him except perhaps a mild sense of curiosity at how they had survived this long. They wept at art. These strange creatures actually wept, fluid leaking from their eyes when they encountered beauty or sorrow. They adopted the orphaned young of other species and raised them as their own. Even species that had once been their enemies. They built hospitals on plague worlds and asked for nothing in return. Sent their doctors into danger zones where no sane species would venture. And seemed genuinely confused when others called them foolish for it, when the Dominion of Kresh had insulted their ambassador last cycle, calling humans weak and pathetic and fit only for servitude. The human response had been to invite the Kresh delegation to dinner. Kethvorl had watched that dinner from his usual corner of the diplomatic hall, had watched the humans laugh and pour drinks and tell stories as if they had not just been publicly humiliated weak. He had concluded. And he was not alone in that assessment. Now the Kresh Dominion had begun what they called annexation operations on the human colony worlds of the Outer Rim. And everyone in the galaxy knew what annexation meant when the Kresh said it. It meant soldiers in chains and a future of servitude for anyone unfortunate enough to live on those worlds. Kethvorl expected negotiations. Expected the humans to offer concessions and compromises and whatever it took to avoid conflict with a species that had conquered 43 civilizations. Made his way to the grand chamber where the emergency session was being held, his forelegs carrying him silently across the polished floor. The chamber was full. Representatives from every major power watching to see how humanity would respond to its first real test. Director Chun stood at the human podium. A small woman with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that seemed too calm for someone whose people were under attack. The Kresh ambassador, a massive creature covered in bony plates and carrying the scars of 100 conquests, was speaking when Kethvorl entered. The Dominion offers humanity a choice. The ambassador rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. Submit and serve, or watch your colonies burn. There is no third option. There has never been a third option for any species that faced us. Kethvorl waited for Director Chun to begin the expected speech about peace and understanding and mutual cooperation. Instead, she simply looked at the Kresh ambassador with those two calm eyes and said, "You have 60 standard cycles to withdraw all forces from human space. This is not a negotiation." Silence fell over the chamber. Then the Kresh ambassador laughed, a horrible sound like bones breaking, and soon half the chamber was laughing with him. Kethvorl did not laugh, but he did make another note in his archive. Humans appear to have made a diplomatic error. They do not seem to understand their position. Director Chun did not seem bothered by the laughter, did not seem bothered by anything at all. And that was when Cathfaro felt the first tiny flicker of something that might have been unease. The session ended with nothing resolved. The Kresh, confident in their coming victory, and the other powers, already discussing how to divide up human trade routes once the conquest was completed. Vorl returned to his observation post and continued his work, cataloging and noting and filing away data about a species he was certain would soon cease to matter. 60 cycles past, the Kresh did not withdraw. And why would they? No species had ever successfully resisted them. No species had ever even treated. Cathvarl was on the observation deck when it happened, watching the usual flow of beings moving through the station. Humans mixed among them, as they always were. Then every human on the station went still at the same moment. Cathvarl had seen many things in his long existence, but he had never seen anything quite like this. Hundreds of humans scattered across the visible area, all freezing in place, as if they had been turned to stone. They were looking at their personal communication devices, all of them, reading something that had been sent to every human simultaneously. Then they began to move again, but differently now, with a purpose that had not been there before. They were not running, not panicking, just moving with calm efficiency toward the docking bays. A human man walked past Cathvarl's position, and the archivist reached out to stop him. "What is happening?" Cathvarl asked. "What message did you receive?" The human looked at him, and Cathvarl saw something in those eyes that he did not recognize, something that made his twin hearts beat faster for the first time in centuries. "The 60 cycles are up," the human said simply. "They did not listen, they never listen. What will you do?" Cathvarl pressed. The human was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with something that sounded almost like grief. "What we hoped we would never have to do again." Then he was gone, walking toward the docking bay with all the others. And within an hour, every single human had left Concordance. Cathvarl stood alone at the observation deck and watched their ships depart. A feeling he could not name settling into his chest. He opened his archive and began a new entry. But for the first time in 300 years, he did not know what to write. Fleet Commander Dravax stood on the bridge of his flagship and surveyed the greatest armada the Kresh Dominion had assembled in a century. 12,000 warships stretched across the void, their dark hulls blocking out the stars, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce a planet to ash. This was the instrument of conquest that had broken 43 species, and now it would break the 44th humans. Dravax thought with contempt. Soft creatures who wept and hugged and could not even respond to an insult with proper violence. This conquest would be the easiest in Dominion history. A simple matter of overwhelming force against a species too gentle to fight back. His tactical officer approached with the latest intelligence reports, and Dravax noticed something strange in the way the officer moved. A hesitation that had not been there before. "Report," Dravax commanded. "The human colonies are evacuating, Commander. But there is something unusual about the pattern. Unusual how they are moving with perfect efficiency. No panic, no chaos. The civilians are being loaded onto transport ships while many of the adults choose to stay behind." Dravax snorted, a sound of pure derision. Cowards abandoning their homes. "What else would you expect from such a weak species?" "Commander," the officer said slowly, "the ones who stay behind, they are not afraid. Our scouts report that they are smiling. Far across the galaxy." Archivist Cathvarl was not sleeping. He sat in his personal archive chamber, surrounded by data crystals older than most civilizations, searching for something that had been nagging at him since he watched the humans leave Concordance Prime. There had been something in that human's eyes, something ancient and terrible that did not match anything in his 3 centuries of observation. He pulled record after record, going deeper into the Silurian archives than he had ventured in 1,000 years. Until he found what he was looking for, files were old, corrupted. Fragments from before the collective's founding over 40,000 years ago, references to a species called Terrans, who had fought in something called the extinction spiral, a conflict so devastating that entire regions of the galaxy remained uninhabitable to this day. Most of the data was lost. But Kethvarl found a single surviving note from a long-dead archivist whose name had been erased by time. The words made his blood run cold. They are not a caretaker species. They became one. There is a difference that we must never forget. They chose gentleness the way a warrior chooses to sheathe a blade. The blade remains. Kethvarl read the words again, then again. His twin hearts pounding in his chest. 40,000 years, he thought. 40,000 years they have hidden what they truly are. He immediately began composing an emergency message to the Kresh Dominion. A warning that might already be too late. The Kresh fleet dropped out of hyperspace above the first human colony world with weapons hot and shields raised, ready for whatever pathetic resistance the humans might offer. They found nothing. The planet was abandoned. Cities empty, farms untended, streets silent except for the Windravax ordered ground teams to search for survivors or intelligence. And they reported back within hours with a discovery that made no sense. There was a single structure still powered on the northern continent. A building the humans called a Muzumdravax ordered it investigated, expecting weapons caches or hidden defenses. And instead, his soldiers found themselves walking through rooms filled with images and artifacts from something called human history. The first room seemed harmless enough. Paintings of landscapes and portraits of important figures and displays of primitive tools. Then the soldiers moved deeper, and the reports stopped making sense. "Commander," came the shaky voice of his ground team leader. "You need to see this." Travax watched through the video feed as his soldiers walked through room after room of horrors, images of humans killing other humans in numbers that defied comprehension. Wars that lasted years and claimed millions of lives. Weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. He saw images of something called a trench. Ditches filled with mud and bodies where humans had fought and died by the hundreds of thousands for patches of ground smaller than his ship. He saw the aftermath of something called Hiroshima, a city reduced to shadows and ash by a weapon the humans had used on themselves before they ever reached the stars. He saw records of genocides and massacres and atrocities committed not by monsters, but by ordinary humans who had simply decided that other humans deserved to die. His tactical officer was trembling, his scales pale with shock. "Commander," the officer whispered, "they did this to each other before they even knew other species existed. They did this to their own kind." Travax wanted to dismiss it as propaganda, as some elaborate trick designed to frighten the Dominion into retreat, but the images were too detailed, too numerous, too horrifically real to be fabricated. This was not the history of a soft species. This was the history of predators who had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing. And then, impossibly, they had stopped. They had chosen to become the gentle creatures that Travax had dismissed as weak. They had put away their weapons and their hatred and their terrible capacity for destruction. And they had spent the next several thousand years pretending to be something they were not. The museum's final room contained a single display, a message written in every known galactic language. "We hoped you would never see this. We hoped we would never have to show you who we used to be. But you would not listen. You never listen. So now you know what you have awakened." Travax was still processing these words when the communication alert sounded on his bridge. The message was short. Broadcast from Earth's direction on every frequency simultaneously. "You wanted to meet humanity," the voice said. Cold and calm and somehow more terrifying than any battle cry. Here we come. Dravux looked at his tactical display and watched as impossible readings began appearing at the edges of sensor range ships emerging from nowhere. From fold space tiers that should not exist. From dimensions that the Dominion's best scientists had never even theorized. Thousands of them, then tens of thousands. Spreading across the void like a tide of shadows, the fleet commander, who had conquered worlds, felt something he had not felt since he was a child. He felt afraid. Catfarrell watched the war unfold from a neutral observation vessel positioned at the edge of the conflict zone. And what he witnessed shattered everything he thought he understood about physics, about warfare, about the nature of civilization itself. It did not happen like galactic warfare was supposed to happen. There were no fleet engagements where mighty armadas clashed in the void. No orbital bombardments where ships rained fire upon helpless worlds. No warnings or ultimatums or chances to surrender. The humans simply appeared one moment, crash. Ships held formation around their conquered territories. And the next moment those ships were gone, erased from existence by weapons that defied comprehension. Caleb reviewed the sensor data again and again, trying to understand what he was seeing. Human vessels emerged from tiers in space itself, from fold points that the most advanced species in the galaxy had declared impossible, from dimensions that existed only in theoretical mathematics. They did not travel through space so much as ignore it entirely, appearing wherever they wished to be with no warning and no way to predict their movements. 40,000 years. Catfarrell realized with growing horror. They have had 40,000 years to develop technology while pretending to be harmless. The combat footage that reached his vessel made his twin hearts stutter. Human soldiers moved faster than crash targeting systems could track, their armor shifting and adapting in real time to whatever weapons were used against them. Human ships seemed to exist in multiple places simultaneously, and firing upon one image simply caused it to flicker while the real vessel struck from an unexpected angle, and the weapons themselves were nightmares made. Real Catfarrell watched a human cruiser fire something that looked like a beam of pure darkness, and where that beam touched a crash battleship, the ship simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but erased, removed from causality as if it had never been built. He watched human ground forces engage crushed soldiers on an occupied world, and the footage from that battle would haunt him for the rest of his long existence. A human soldier took a plasma bolt directly through the chest, a wound that should have been instantly fatal. And the soldier fell. Then the soldier got back up. The hole in her chest sealed itself in seconds, flesh and armor knitting together as if time itself was running backward. And she continued fighting without even slowing down. Catfarrell saw human medics working frantically to save wounded, crashed soldiers, treating their enemies with the same care and desperation they showed their own fallen comrades. Then those same medics picked up weapons and rejoined the fight, tears streaming down their faces as they killed the friends of the beings they had just tried to save. That was when Catfarrell understood something that chilled him to his core. The humans were not enjoying this. They were not berserkers lost in battle rage, not monsters reveling in destruction, not conquerors drunk on power. They were grieving. Every human he observed, from the lowest soldier to the highest commander, carried an expression of profound sorrow, as if each death, each act of violence, was a personal wound they would carry forever. He watched a human commander, a woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much, weep openly as she gave the order for an orbital strike on a crashed military installation. The tears ran down her face and her voice shook, but her hand never wavered as she pressed the firing control. "Forgive us," she whispered to no one in particular. And then the installation and everyone in it ceased to exist somehow. That made it worse. A species that killed without remorse could be understood, could be categorized and predicted. but a species that killed while mourning each death. That wept for its enemies, even as it destroyed them. That was something Kethferl had no framework to comprehend. The Kresh lost 8,000 ships in 11 hours. 8,000 vessels crewed by beings who had believed themselves the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Reduced to scattered atoms by an enemy they had dismissed as too soft to fight, Commander Dravax survived. Barely. His flagship torn and burning around him as he limped away from the massacre. He had watched his fleet die, had watched the Dominion's military might evaporate like morning dew. And he no longer felt like a conqueror, he felt like prey. The communication alert sounded. And Dravax knew before he answered that it would be the humans. The face that appeared on his screen was not what he expected. It was a human male, middle-aged by their standards, with tired eyes and gray streaking through his dark hair. He did not look like a warrior celebrating victory. He looked like a father who had been forced to do something terrible to protect his children. "Commander Dravax," the human said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your invasion has failed. This war is over if you choose to end it. What do you want?" Dravax rasped, his pride broken along with his ships. "Your government has 60 cycles to surrender. Not your military, your government. Every politician who voted for this war. Every general who gave the orders to attack our colonies. Give them to us." Dravax felt a flicker of his old defiance. "And if we refuse?" The human's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, became older and colder and infinitely more frightening. "Then we will come get them ourselves. And Commander, we know where they live. We have always known. We know the names of their children and the locations of their homes and the routes they take to work. Each morning." The human paused. And when he spoke again, his voice cracked with something that sounded like grief. "We do not want to do this. We have spent 40,000 years trying to be better than this. But you attacked our families. You threatened our children. And there is nothing in this universe that we will not do to protect them. Please," the human finished. And the word was almost a prayer. "Please do not make us become what we used to be. Not again, not ever again." The transmission ended, and Commander Dravax sat alone in the ruins of his bridge for the first time in his life. He began to compose a message to his government recommending unconditional surrender. He did not do it because he was afraid of the human weapons or their impossible technology. He did it because he had seen the look in that human's eyes. The look of someone who would burn the galaxy to ash to protect what they loved and hate themselves for every moment of it. That, Dravax realized, was far more terrifying than any enemy he had ever faced. The war was over, and the galaxy would never be the same. Kethferl returned to Concordance Prime to find the great station transformed. Its halls full of refugees from both sides and diplomats scrambling to understand what had just happened. The Kresh Dominion was in chaos. Its government collapsed, its military shattered, its people struggling to comprehend how their invincible empire had been broken in less than 2 weeks, and the humans had simply stopped fighting. They had achieved total military victory, had demonstrated power beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. And then they had put their weapons away and started sending aid to the very people they had just defeated. Kethferl could not understand it. And so he did something he had never done in 3 centuries of observation. He requested a personal audience with Director Chunshi, agreed to meet him in a small conference room on the station's diplomatic level. And when Kethferl entered, he found not the conquering warlord he had expected, but a tired woman who looked like she had not slept in weeks. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Her hands trembled slightly when she lifted her cup of tea. And there were new lines on her face that had not been there before the war. "Archivist Kethferl," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "I wondered when you would come. You have been watching us longer than most." 300 years, Kethferl confirmed. settling his four-legged frame onto the chair designed for beings like him. And in all that time, I never saw what you truly were. I need to understand how I could have been so wrong. Director Chun was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea as if searching for answers in its depths. You were not wrong, she finally said. Everything you saw was real. The kindness, the compassion, the desire for peace. That is who we are. Then explain what I witnessed in the war, Cathferl pressed. Explain the weapons and the technology and the soldiers who would not stay dead. Explain how a species that weeps at art could destroy 8,000 ships in 11 hours. Chun set down her cup and met his eyes. And Cathferl saw something in her gaze that he had never seen in all his years of observation. He saw shame. Do you know what humans were before we reached the stars? She asked quietly. I found fragments in the old archives, Cathferl admitted. Records of something called the extinction spiral. Chun nodded slowly. Then you know what we used to be. 40,000 years ago, we were the most violent species the galaxy had ever seen. We fought each other constantly, killed each other in numbers that would make the Kresh look like pacifists. We developed weapons capable of destroying worlds before we even achieved faster than light travel. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars with an expression of infinite weariness. The extinction spiral was our awakening. We pushed ourselves to the very edge of self-annihilation, came within a hair's breadth of wiping ourselves out completely. And in that moment, standing at the precipice of our own extinction, we finally understood what we truly were. And what is that? Cathferl asked. Monsters, Chen said simply. We are monsters. Every human carries within them the capacity for extraordinary violence. It is written in our evolution, woven into our very neurons. We are predators who spent millions of years becoming the most efficient killers our world had ever produced. She turned back to face him, and her voice grew stronger. But we chose differently. We looked at what we had done, at all the blood and death and horror, and we decided that we did not want to be monsters anymore. We chose to put chains on the beast inside us, to lock it away and throw away the key. The kindness I observed, Cathferl said slowly. The compassion, the desire for peace. All real, Chun confirmed. But not natural. We have to work at it every single day. Every human you have ever met has been actively choosing not to be a monster, moment by moment, decision by decision, holding back the darkness through sheer force of will. Then why release it now? Cathferl demanded. Why unleash such destruction for a few colony worlds? Chun's composure cracked, and for a moment she looked unbearably old, because those were not worlds to us. They were homes, families, children. The Kresh did not attack our territory. They attacked our people. They threatened the ones we love. She sat back down, her hands clasped in front of her. We learned a long time ago that sometimes the most moral choice is to be immoral quickly, to become the monster for a brief, terrible moment so that you can be good again sooner. We did not enjoy what we did. We did not celebrate our victories. Every soldier who fought in that war will carry the weight of it for the rest of their lives. I saw your commander weeping as she ordered strikes, Cathferl said. I did not understand. She was mourning, Chun said. Mourning the enemy lives she was about to take. Mourning the piece of herself she was sacrificing. Mourning the return of the monster she had spent her whole life trying to keep locked away. And now? Cathferl asked. What happens now? Chun smiled, and it was the saddest smile he had ever seen. Now we put the chains back on. We lock the beast away again and try to rebuild what was broken. And we pray that we never have to do this again. You are sending aid to the Kresh, Cathferl noted. Food, medicine, teachers, you are treating them like family. They are family now, Chun said. They are part of our responsibility. We broke their world, and so we will help them build a new one. That is what it means to be human. We will always try to make things better, even when we are the ones who made them worse. Kethferl sat in silence, processing everything he had heard. Finally, he asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the war ended. The galaxy fears you now. Fears what you could do if you ever stopped holding back. How do you expect other species to trust you? Chun's sad smile returned. We do not expect them to trust us. We expect to have to earn that trust every single day for the rest of time. That is our burden. That is the price of being what we are. We cannot change our nature, but we can choose how we express it. And we will keep choosing peace until the universe ends or someone gives us no choice. She met his eyes with an intensity that made his twin heart skip. An alchemist. I hope with every fiber of my being that nothing ever gives us no choice again, because the galaxy survived facing us once. I do not know if it could survive facing us twice. Kethferl left the meeting with more questions than answers. But one thing had become crystal clear: he needed to rewrite everything the Silurian collective thought they knew about humanity. They were not a caretaker species. They were not a warrior species. They were something entirely new, something the galaxy had never seen before. They were the monster that had chosen to become a guardian, and they carried the weight of that choice every single day. 5 years had passed since the war. An archivist, Kethferl, had done something unprecedented in the entire history of the Silurian collective. He had requested permanent assignment to Earth. The collective had been confused by his request, questioning why one of their finest archivists would want to spend his remaining centuries on a single world when there was an entire galaxy to catalog. Kethferl had not explained his reasons fully, had not told them that the humans had shattered everything he believed, and that he needed to understand how they had put themselves back together. So here he was, standing in the morning light outside a human elementary school, watching children stream through the gates for another day of learning. A human administrator had agreed to let him observe. And so Kethferl stood in the corner of a classroom, filled with small humans who could not have been more than 6 or 7 years old. The teacher was a young woman with kind eyes, and she was teaching a history lesson. Kethferl expected propaganda, expected the humans to tell their children stories of glory and triumph and righteous victory. Instead, the teacher showed them images of the war, real images, unedited and unflinching. She showed them crushed soldiers and human soldiers alike, showed them the destruction and the death and the terrible cost of violence. The children did not look away, and Kethferl realized that this was intentional, that humans taught their young to face the darkness rather than hide from it. Why did we fight? The teacher asked her class. Who can tell me? A small boy raised his hand. Because they hurt our families and we had to protect them. Yes, the teacher said. And how did fighting make us feel? Sad, a little girl answered. My daddy cried when he came home. That is right, the teacher said gently. Fighting hurts everyone, even the winners. That is why we only fight when we have no other choice. And that is why we try every single day to be kind, so that we never have to fight again. Kethferl watched the children nod solemnly, watched them accept this lesson as naturally as they accepted mathematics and science. This was how humans raised their young. He realized they taught them the truth about what they were capable of, and then taught them to choose something better later that day. Kethferl visited a memorial that had been built in the capital city. It honored the dead from the war, Kresh and human alike. Their names carved into white stone that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. Human families moved quietly among the monuments, leaving flowers and touching names and weeping for losses that were still fresh. But Kethferl also saw Kresh visitors, former enemies who had come to pay respect to their own fallen. And no human gave them hostile looks or angry words. One human woman was actually helping an elderly creche male find a specific name on the wall. And when they found it, they stood together in silence, sharing grief across the divide of species that evening. Kethvarol attended a dinner hosted by a group of human veterans. These were beings who had fought in the war, who had killed and nearly been killed, who had unleashed the monster inside them and then somehow locked it away again. He expected them to be broken, to be haunted shells of their former selves. Instead, he found people who laughed and told stories and argued about sports and complained about their jobs. But he also noticed the way they sometimes fell silent, the way their eyes grew distant, the way their hands trembled when certain topics arose. One veteran, a woman who had served as a combat medic, excused herself to volunteer at a refugee center after dinner. Kethvarol followed her and watched as she spent hours caring for beings from a dozen different species, treating wounds and providing comfort with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone who had seen so much violence. "How do you do it?" he asked her during a quiet moment. "How do you go back to being kind after everything you have done and seen?" The woman looked at him with eyes that were older than her years. "I do not go back," she said. "I choose forward. Every day I wake up and I decide who I want to be. And every day I choose to be someone who helps. That does not erase what I did. But it means that what I did was not the end of my story." On his last evening on Earth, Kethvarol sat on the balcony of his quarters and watched the sun set over a human city below him. Life continued in all its ordinary beauty. People going about their business, children playing in parks, couples walking hand in hand, artists painting, musicians playing, friends sharing meals somewhere. A woman was singing an old lullaby that humans had sung to their children for thousands of years. Kethvarol did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. Love and protection and the promise of safety. He opened his archive and began composing his final report to the Silurian Collective. For 300 years, I believed I understood humanity. I was wrong. I thought their kindness was weakness. It is strength, the greatest strength I have ever witnessed. It takes no effort to be cruel. It takes no effort to surrender to rage. To be gentle when you carry thunder in your veins. To be merciful when you could be monstrous. To choose peace while knowing you could choose annihilation. That is the hardest thing any being can do. Humans do it every single day. They are not innocent. They are not naive. They are something far more remarkable. They are the monster that decided to become the hero instead. I came here to study a species. I leave having witnessed something I thought impossible. Beings who stared into the abyss of their own capacity for destruction and chose to become gardeners instead. They have shattered everything I believed. And I am grateful. Perhaps, with time, we can learn to make the same choice. End report. Kethvarol closed his archive and continued watching the sunset, letting the colors wash over him as the city lights began to flicker on below. He had lived for centuries and expected to live for centuries more. But he knew that this moment would stay with him forever. This quiet evening on a world that had taught him what it truly meant to be civilized. It was not about power or technology or conquest. It was about choice. The humans had shown him that the measure of a species was not what they were capable of, but what they chose to do with that capability. They chose to build instead of destroy, to heal instead of harm, to love instead of hate, and they made that choice every single day, knowing full well that the darkness still lived inside them, knowing that one wrong step could unleash it again. That Kethvarol finally understood was what made them the most remarkable species in the galaxy. Not their weapons, not their technology, not their capacity for violence, their capacity for hope. The lullaby continued drifting up from somewhere below, and for the first time in 4 centuries, archivist Kethvarol of the Silurian Collective felt something he had almost forgotten existed. He felt hope too.